This is the polar opposite to how I brew V60s. Like when I do V60 or when I brew say, like my entire thought process is I think kind of back to my first experiences at that shop. And it's like mega in front, loud, vibrant, bright coffees. And my entire thought process with like brewing these coffees is I want to just take a lot of this acidity and kind of like not necessarily compress it, but like push it up front. Cause that's like my experience with drinking some of these really beautiful coffees is like that is what makes say interesting. So that's kind of was like the initial thought process is how do I take what is already very interesting in this coffee and kind of push it all the way up front. Like this is just in pure practical experience of just brewing a lot of coffee. I find that the faster you pour, the longer blooms that you do, a lot of that shifts a lot of the acidity up front. So when you taste these coffees, say like on a coffee like this Esmeralda, it says orange blossom, jasmine, lavender, right? Like you get that initial hit of acidity up front. Like, it's very interesting. Like, oh, that is what is interesting and makes this coffee, complex or beautiful or has vibrancy and all of that. So that's like was the initial thought process. However, if you are chasing extraction yields and if you want to brew V60 in like kind of a very different way, this is the opposite direction where you brew with something like Mellow Drip or Pulsar or all of that. And the entire idea is to create a very harmonious brew. Basically, the thought is if we brew in a very transparent way, because our coffees are so expressive, there should be the dynamics. So it's dynamics from the coffee versus dynamics from the brew, if that makes sense. And the brew is relatively transparent, right? It's not, you're not imparting much dynamics or pouring because coffee's dumb in the sense that how I pour water on this will and what brewer I use and all that will impart things. But because you need to serve the drink to somebody or you want to drink it, right, you can't just put it in a cupping bowl, right? You still want to have a filter of some sort. So this is kind of that version with utilizing something like this. Is it's lower agitation, but you're letting the coffee shine. As with all of these tools and all of these different methods of brewing, a very cool thing is you can combine all of them and you can find the best version of everything. So I'm going to use David Barrio. Quite an amazing coffee. So this is a washed churroso. It says lively acidity, ripe peach, and berry-like complexity. So like if you think about the cone, instead of the kettle going like the stream water going like really into here, we are kind of agitating the top bit more. So you get, percolation effect, right? In the cup, it's like, we're going to try to like stretch things out. We're going to try to stretch things out and make a very harmonious cup. And we're going to hope the acidity is what gives the cup kind of dynamics versus pushing up the acidity or changing the balance of the cup due to pouring structure. 15 grams in this example, and we're going to target kind of the same ratios. I think what you will find that's quite interesting with this type of brew method is because you can go and manipulate the fines in something like a V60. So the thought process is like basically I can go around. I can control a variety of things. So obviously I can control how fast I pour into here. And then second of all, I can control the distance. So this controls agitation. And then I can also control the angle or where I'm pouring. So I can basically push fines around the cup. Also will utilize one of the sticks. A big reason why I use this thing, which the leaf, is mainly I think agitation, like physical agitation, wet WDT during bloom, it makes these coffees taste really good. It really helps get a lot of that initial acidity out. So yeah, I'm using 15 grams. And because we're using something like the Mellow Drip, we actually can grind very fine. Like you can get away with grind sizes that are like pretty crazy, like pretty crazily fine, because you can always like basically manipulate the fines around. And then this is set to 100, pour water into here. And then we also have to pour water, and then it has to go through here. You will lose some temperature. So if you have a very, very lightly roasted coffee, it benefits to use the hotter temperature to kind of compensate for that. If you had something that really needs like, you know, the mega extraction. Let's do like 52. So this to me is definitely on the finer side. What I can do is I can go like this, get closer, get higher, and all of this changes the agitation, and you'll essentially see grounds get pushed everywhere. So 15 to 255. So here we go. And I'm going to do 60 gram bloom. So the thing is with this is, see, I can move it around. I can change the distance in which I pour. I hope the camera's seen this, but with this, you want to, with the stick, you guys can see it, is you kind of want to like push things around. But yeah, like it's the same thing with like wet WDT, where I can, you know, go in, I can agitate like this, I can push the grounds around, but you're not going to tear a paper filter with something like this. This is now, I've made the bed very ugly. And then kind of go around here. So I like to do like around together, but it doesn't like matter too much. You know, that's the nice thing. So I can change the distance of the bed. I can change the distance of this from the bed. I also can get very extended brew times with this. So I'm pouring relatively fast because I'm like very used to pouring fast, but I'll show you guys how slow you can pour. This is a very forgiving brewing experience. But you can see like the water gets clearer as you do this. And that's the kind of thing with all of this, is we get like this clearer bed. But yeah, basically that's essentially, yeah, you'll end up with this like much more extended brew time. Because of how you pour, it pushes a lot of like the bad stuff, right? In this case, you have these fines here. And I'm running this at 60 RPM, so it's like you could even grind it finer. A lot of that gets pushed like up. And I could have always like did the swirl. This is at least how I brew this style of coffee. You know, like there's no right and wrong way to do this. Taste it now. Yeah. So this to me, you know, very, very sweet up front, very harmonious. The thing is like I feel like I could grind this even finer. Right? Like you can push so close, you can push like extended ratios, you can push things so far out that it's pretty crazy, right? And that's like the fun thing with this type of brewing. It's very nice. It's just like super balanced, very sweetness forward. Like to me, this is a very good cup. Like this still does have some of that pushed up acidity that the V60 gets you, but it's like super harmonious. The notes are very tied together and largely sweetness forward. So that's kind of the bigger difference, is this is basically like sweetness forward, then you get the acidity, versus acidity forward that then finishes into sweet. So that's kind of just like the taste notes difference. In my experience, at least brewing my V60 versus this. I'm gonna brew another one just for additional demonstration purposes. But yeah, this is just like, you know, we're using the same brewer that we use. A lot of the things I think I nowadays with my brewing approaches and just thought process on brewing is it's just dynamics, man. It's not like one is definitely better than another. It's just a different presentation, different dynamics. Do you want more of one property or another property? Like, what do you basically want to happen in the cup, right? So to me, that's more like, you know, I've been chasing this acidity forwardness, right? I want acidity up front. That's what makes these coffees interesting to me, is the acidity. However, some people may want sweetness. Let's brew another cup and we will go from there. The dose, again, is 15 grams. This recipe is very, very strong for a lot of coffees where you want definition. So, for example, this is a really great coffee. This is Esmeralda, Hacienda La Esmeralda. You know, you have these flavor notes. You have jasmine, lavender, orange blossom, peach, bergamot. With my recipe, you definitely will get those more like brighter notes up front. Like that is what you should experience, you know, all of these coffees, right? You should just experience that acidity up front. However, with this type of recipe, which we will do, what we're going to end up with is a lot of those kind of extra flavor notes, the extra sweetness, the extension of flavor notes, and less louder acidity notes. So that's kind of the bigger difference, is like this is going to be very sweetness forward. My recipe, which is dump water very, very fast, is going to be very acidity forward. These are notes that you can get on a cupping table, right? You grind the coffee, you put it in a cupping table. It's a very harmonious presentation of the coffee. Like there are like 3 flavor notes on here. With my recipe, you 100% can probably get the first 2, which is, what does he say? Ripe pineapple, bright acidity. There's a hops note, but this hops note with my recipe probably won't be as present. With something like this, a very transparent, stretched out brew, where you want the dynamics of the coffee to shine, probably will get the hops at the end. Like you'll get kind of this extension of flavor notes, like the more transparent cup. That's what you should be able to get with these coffees. And I think that to me is like the biggest difference in the cup, is like, if I'm brewing my recipe, I'm like, oh, I can see some of these flavor notes, right? To hit all the notes on the bag, I think that's really where these more transparent recipes come into play. And I'm going to grind pretty fine, like finer than what I think should be allowed. I'm just grinding at 52. So I have my 15 grams here. Relatively fine grind, I would say. You know, like we're not really seeing that much chaff. Pretty pulverized. I have a little more than 15, but that's fine. And with the mellow drip, what you can do is you can preheat it. And I like to kind of just, you know, pour some boiling water onto it. Heat it up, make sure it's ready to go. And what we're going to do is I'm going to do a 60-gram bloom. So this is just a slightly different variation of my recipe, but instead of we doing the kettle agitation, we're doing mellow drip. Here we go. Pour 60. And I can move this around and make sure all the coffee bed is saturated. And I can go in here and I can kind of just like push the grounds in, right? Like we basically can make sure that the grounds on the side are pushed in. I hope the camera can see that. But I would say with a recipe like this, and just in general, like I am so like not, bed visuals are fine. Like it's not gonna look pretty. But wow, this coffee smells quite amazing. So this is this coffee. John Alexander Bermudez, late harvest. And I do want these coffees to open up for about a minute. Like I do want them to bloom. And then you gotta make sure the kettle's at 100. And then you can pour it a little slower. But as you see here, I'm kind of going around to make sure that everything is kind of touched. I'm going to 170, around 170. And you can see that I can vary the distance, and I can also vary kind of the angle, and I also have control with the kettle itself to pour pouring speed and pouring distance, which I just added a little more of that. So yeah, that's kind of the cool thing with this, is you have control over the height. Gives you different agitation. But as you already see here, you kind of can see the bed of water. It might be hard to see in the video. It will get clearer and clearer, and you'll get very extended brew times. Like basically with this, you should just let the bed of water almost fully drain out. So you can see like it's gonna almost fully drain out. I'm gonna then start adding more, and I'm just targeting my 270, and I'm kind of just like going around here. And I am pouring like relatively high agitation. So go 257. And what I can do here is obviously I can swirl and tap, but I have found if you just let this guy sit, it will be fine. And that's the thing with this lower agitation stuff, is you'll see kind of like the bed of water get clearer and clearer. I am using the Cafec T90s, so the drawdown time, or at least the flow, is quite constant. And what you should see is you should see the fines get pushed around. Like if I zoom in, if I wanted to make this bed look prettier, what I could have done is obviously I could have swirled and tapped there, but obviously I'm trying to show you guys something. So you can see that the fines here, right, they still get pushed around, and that is going to have less time touching the coffee. But that's also the thing with a recipe like this is, and with something like Mellow Drip is it just feels like you can get away with so much stuff, right? We do so many things that like we can grind finer and all that. Oh yeah, and then on the timer, right, we finished at around like 3:30 something. It's a much longer extended brew, right? You can totally like brew into these like 4 to 5 minute brews. And maybe even longer, and they should taste completely fine. And that's the interesting thing with a recipe like this. But really, it's the ratio, like, you know, being able to push into 1 to 17 plus easily. Like I definitely could have pushed into 1 to 18. I mean, this is a relatively low fines grinder because we're grinding at 60, but you know, all of the bad stuff, because we are grinding much finer than what I would grind if I was doing it by hand, you know, without Mellow Drip. We can get away with doing something like this, and it should taste okay. Hello. Now, I'm going to taste this coffee, and I'm going to let you know if it tastes any good. You know, my variation on this recipe is just to basically say, look, this is a very different presentation than my regular recipe, which is like dump a shit ton of water very, very fast. So here is this brew. Very harmonious, very balanced, very clean. The acidity is really shifted more towards like the middle and the back, but it's very clean. And that's the type of it's just different, right? It's like at this point in time with coffee brewing, I'm just more of like, what is different, right? Is it better? It probably isn't better. And everybody has their own personal preferences. But the basic thing is, if you just look at how long the water is touching the coffee, it's gonna taste different, right? It's also how you pour water on the coffee is going to taste different, right? The type of agitation is quite different. That's the thing. I use the word different because it is different. It's not necessarily better. But again, this is the presentation where, for me, I'm getting a lot of sweetness up front. Like the initial thing that's hitting me is like some level of sweetness. And then it's the acidity, and the acidity is happening much more towards the middle and the back. So really, it's not really like acidity forward. This is still, you know, a filtered brew. It's still a higher bypass v60 style brew, but it just tastes different, right? The dynamics are really what's interesting. So I think that's fun, right? You know, you take the same coffee, you brew with different recipes, and you experience things, right? You're like, what does it do here versus what does it do here? And I think that's kind of the biggest thing with this, but this is tasting great. I'm getting like basically the extension of flavor notes. Like I'm getting like all the different other additional flavor descriptors. And I think that's what's fun with this recipe. However, personally speaking, I don't like this recipe that much versus my recipe, versus like direct high flow kettle agitation. Mainly just because of just how I'm into coffees nowadays, which is like I want to be punched in the face with battery acid. This to me is very different. It's a different style, right? It is punch in the face with sweetness versus punch in the face with acidity. Then you get kind of, they're flipped, right? That's the entire thing, is that the dynamics in the cup are quite flipped. And that's what's fun. The recipe that I formed for V60 was really formed around my first experiences going to the Say Cafe, which was like, whoa, acidity forward coffees. You know, nowadays, I think like a lot of people are into experimenting with brewers, like low bypass brewers, zero bypass brewers, high extraction things that create very harmonious cups. So this is kind of this interesting thing where it's a different, it's just a different style, and it's fun. So yeah, that's this type of recipe. Hope that was interesting.